Well, let's say very briefly. This institute is a small presidential foundation, quite differently from the United States. In Brazil, after you finish your term, you go back home and you have no pension personally, no money for zero, for nothing. And you have people to take care because you have 4 assistants, bodyguards, and cars, and don't know where to put all these people. So you have to do something. In the past, the Brazilian president preferred not to do anything. It was a pity because most of the archives have been destroyed because of it's difficult to take care of papers. So my decision was, let's try to see what can be done. Considering that I have only private sources, I have to ask for support from business or rich people, and we cannot ask for very high amounts of money. So how to conciliate the necessity to take care of the archives and to. So I sent one of my assistants. She was before when I was in office. She was working with me with the documents. To visit briefly different institutions across the globe, some in America and some in Europe. In America, it's quite different because the government normally supports the foundations, and also because you have the tax exemption for those who are giving money. That's not the Brazilian case. So we decide to imitate what has been done by a friend of mine who has been president from Portugal 2 or 3 times, Mário Soares. And Mário Soares has a small foundation in Lisbon, which is in one house, but with highly use of technology, internet and so on and so forth. So I try to imitate that in a very small place, like the place where you are. We have these 2 floors, the 50th floor and this, and 2 basements where the documents are. And we use within our possibilities, the more modern technology to take care of the document, and also to give access. You can have access through internet of the majority of the documents. So, of course, some documents are still classified; you cannot have access, but the others you can have access. And since my great grandfather was already under the empire in Brazil in 19th century, was governor of one of the Brazilian provinces. My grandfather was a field marshal. My father was a general and also member of the parliament. So we have involvement in political life in more than 100 years, 150 years. So I have documents for my family too. So all this is here, and we are trying to give access to this kind of documentation. In the other day, one of the staff members came to see me with a letter. It was a letter handwritten by my grandmother. And he was asking if it would be necessary to keep the letter. I said, look, this man here, named Deodoro, his family name is Fonseca, was the man who made the Republic in Brazil. The other one was this kind of thing, since 50, 100 years ago. So, by curiosity, we have this kind of thing here too. But I think it's senseless only to take care of archives. So we are also creating here a kind of thinking tank. Modest thinking tank, but you have maybe 2 or 3 times every month around this table in discussions with different people, normally about the Brazilian agenda in the global era, which implies, of course, also sustainability, economy, business, and culture, so on and so forth. And since this is a non-party organization, for instance, the Minister of Environment from Lula came to, and from Dilma too, came to have a discussion here, so on and so forth. We are very ample in the way we are leading with these issues. We try to invite people. Normally, we invite people from the academia, from business, from newspapers, and from political sectors. As an average, maybe 100 people came around here every time to have the discussion. And all this is also transmitted by internet. And you can have access to all discussion, all this public here. Then I have a program to receive students too, different, normally from secondary schools. They are the last year in secondary school, they came to have a free dialogue with me. The only thing they cannot ask me is about party politics. The rest is free, and this is also transmitted by internet. And as you have probably seen in the fifth floor, we have a small exhibit, which is a kind of synthesis of the more recent events in the Brazilian life. And we have a program to give access to different schools to come here and to also to see, because they don't have more idea about what inflation means, you see. And so they have to explain to them what's that. It's difficult to understand how it was possible in Brazil to survive. When I was finance minister, the average inflation rate every month was of about 25%, which means annually, I don't know, thousands percent. So it was a crazy situation, and Brazil was under this kind of constraint during at least 2 decades. I don't know how it was possible to survive, and how we are okay now. So this is what we're doing here. Of course, we have also a relationship with different organizations, and we have one program named Democratic Platform, which covers the Latin American process of democratization or non-democracy in Latin America. So again, you have through internet access to different groups in Latin America. And I personally, I belong to several organizations across the globe. I'll give you 2 examples only. One is a small organization created by Nelson Mandela, composed by 10 people, including himself. Now he cannot attend anymore because he's 93 or 94 years old. But it's 10 people who have been influenced in political life or in cultural life. Kofi Annan, for instance, or Tutu Desmond, which is Archbishop of South Africa, was very important in the apartheid struggles against apartheid, and Gro Brundtland, who has been the head of the HIV World Health Organization, and also she was the first person who put the name in a report on environment. And she's also a member of this group. And this group deals with, critical situations across the globe. By critical situation, I'll give you an example: the Sudanese situation, North and South Sudan, or the relationship between Gaza and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Israeli government. And also Birmania, the lady who is the leader of the opposition there, was also a member of this group when she was still out of the political life. Now she went back again to political life, so she's no more attending the meetings. But anyhow, this is a very specific kind of activity that I have with this in this group. There are other groups. I belong to several. I don't want to borrow you, but there is another one which is named Drug Commission on Drug Policies, which is trying to focus in a different way the drug question. I'm chair of this group. We organized one group in Latin America, composed at the beginning by 2 or 3 former presidents, and now much more presidents are involved, including the current president of Colombia and Mexico, etc., to try to see what can be done with the drug question. And again, in the global committee, we have people from the United States, the former head of the Federal Reserve, who has been assistant to President Obama, I forget his name, is member of the commission, and people like that, to people with responsibility, know to deal with this so difficult question, which is how to try to change the approach and to avoid to be considered as a defensor of drug use. It's not simple. So this is to give you 2 examples of what a former president can be involved in, you see. And several other things here. So this is what we are doing here. Now, with respect to the situation you are asking for, how can we... First of all, we are discussing global leadership, which is an extremely difficult question. I was reading again a book I wrote 50 years ago on the leadership, entrepreneurial leadership in Brazil. The title is Industrialization, the Entrepreneur, something like that. I wrote 50 years ago in 61. Well, I was discussing exactly the role of the business leadership at the time. And my point was, I've made a review of the old bibliography about the business elite, business leadership, etc. Now it's different, because now we have to take into account that because of globalization, I didn't use globalization because the concept was completely out at the time. But because of the integration of the markets, I don't remember what I said, what is important now for a business leader is to take account of the global situation. You have to move from the inside the doors of the factory toward the world and to see the political situation, etc., etc. So in the 70s, I was involved in a program in Sweden after the 72 meeting on environment in Uppsala. We had a group there in Uppsala with some people from France and Norway, and trying to develop some concepts which now are eco-development. I don't know how you label at the time, but we are trying to see the compatibility between growth and nature, growth and environment. You remember before that, there was an organization in Rome, the Club of Rome, was asking for a no-growth process in order to avoid a global disaster. For a developing country, this is not acceptable. So how to conciliate development and environment? Well, we are still dealing with these matters nationally in Brazil and globally. And what is the sense of being a global leader now? I would say, basically, it requires the integrated vision, and to understand that what counts is people, and the idea that now is true that it's possible to deal with the concept of humanity without being only, a rhetoric. You have to take into account the interests of all the peoples of the world. How to move from national interests toward a more, humanitarian vision. That is the key question for global leaders. And how to build institutions to deal with that. Unfortunately, we don't have yet. The institutions available nowadays are the institutions built at the end of the Second World War. The United Nations and the trade organization, health organization, so on and so forth. Now, because of the G20, some progress have been made. But if you can read today in newspaper, you see that even regulatory agencies in Europe are trying to put order in the banking system, and it's difficult because the bankers are resisting. So it's possible to face in the future again new financial crisis, and it's extremely difficult to impose a global order into the financial system. So what is needed now is to have this ample vision and the capacity to create new institutions. This is not simple. It has been done after, as I said, at the end of the Second World War, because of people like Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, which are giants. Unfortunately, we don't have available giants across the globe to try to see if it would be possible to renew the global organizations, etc. But anyhow, the spirit is already there, and this is what is necessary to create this kind of personality. And we cannot be seen anymore only in terms of political life or economic life or environment. We have to put together and how to compatibilize all that. This would be, I would say, it will take 100 years to create global organizations capable to compatibilize different interests across the globe. But that's the process in which we are involved in one way or in another way. You see, it's an old dream. You remember in the 18th century, Immanuel Kant already said it's necessary to have a uniform legal system and the capacity to impose rules globally. This is what's necessary. Still, it's necessary, but still we have national interests. How to conciliate, how to avoid a clash between national interests and the necessity to take into account humanity. So at the more ample level, this is what is the question. I will finish this part, then we can answer your questions by saying that I belong to another institution, organization, small one, which is very interesting. It's a kind of shadow cabinet to follow the G20 meetings. And this has been organized basically by, he was born in Germany, he's a Jew, a mix between French and German origin, and lives in America, in California, named Nicolas Gebruin. And he has just now published, well, is about to be published, I don't know if it has been already, a small book with another man named Gardos from California, from Berkeley, trying to make an appraisal of the global situation nowadays, taking into account the Chinese interests and the American interests and the possibility or not to conciliate Chinese and American interests, not avoiding the interests of other parts of the world. It's a very, 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 at least interesting book, because it's a kind of seed thinking about what can be done. And apparently in China, there are some leaders, or at least some intellectual leaders, who are being capable to understand that they have to look more for coincidence of interests than clash of interests. Is it possible to have the convergences to see if you can produce consensus, which is extremely difficult. But anyhow, these are the questions that are the challenge, not for me anymore, but for you who are young. So now, if you want to ask some questions, you said they have 5 different questions.
Oh, we have a lot. We have a lot of questions. First, I want to go back in time, and this question is: 50 years ago, what did you imagine your future would look like today? And is it different from what you imagined? Are you happy? Your personal future, right?
Yeah.
50 years ago, what were you thinking you would be doing, and where would you be? And then, what was your thinking about what Brazil would look like?
Yeah.
And
well, if you refer to 50 years ago.
50, yeah, not 30,
yes,
not 20, 50.
50 years ago, that is to say 63, I was about to leave Brazil to go into exile. Because in 64 we had a military coup in Brazil. So I went to Chile, to Santiago, and then to France. And at the time, our discussion was so different from what is our preoccupation now. Because what was the main question for Brazil and for Latin America at the time? The idea of development, you see? Still a question mark. Would it be possible or not to develop? So underdevelopment was the key issue, the key question. Some people said, well, it's impossible to develop because we are at the periphery of the world system. The only way to develop is through a social revolution, socialism. Other people said, well, maybe it will be possible to approach the center, the more developed countries, by investing more, by extending education, so on and so forth. In between, you had the Cuban Revolution, guerrillas movements, and the Cold War. We're in the middle of the Cold War. So to be unthinkable what happened in 89, the end of the Soviet Empire, would be impossible, unthinkable, completely unthinkable. So that's a good question, because in our horizon, nothing of what occurred. Some years later on, in 66, 67, I wrote another book named Independence and Development in Latin America. We made a seminar in Brown about to celebrate the 40th anniversary of this book. And in this book, I was beginning to understand globalization without even naming the process as such. But then I was beginning to understand the possibilities of a more integrated market and the possibility of more smooth forms of transformation from the underdevelopment into development. These were the key questions. Brazil at the time was already, in the 60s, it was already I would say industrialized country, but comparing with the Latin American country, we had some industries in Brazil. We had good agriculture. I was also working at the Economic Commission for Latin America, which is a United Nations organization who deals with the economy. And our dream was to have at least $1,000 per capita as GDP in Latin America, 1,000, you see. So now Brazil has, 15,000, and still, but it was impossible because the Brazilian per capita income in the 60s, 65, was about between $600 and $500 per capita per year. I remember first time I went to Europe, I was before, in 61, I went to Spain, I passed through Spain, and Spain was at the time similar to Sao Paulo in terms of GDP per capita. Today, Spain has 25,000 or 30,000 per capita, Sao Paulo 15,000. So they made more progress than we did. But anyhow, we made an enormous amount of progress in the last 50 years, you see. I said that we start in the 70s to discuss ecology and environment in Sweden with some friends from France. And the Brazilian minister of finance minister was still alive. He came here very recently. He was also very reactionary at the time and was the key person for the military in the financial era, named Delfim Neto. And he's a very, very, very intelligent man. But along his life, he was very close to the more conservative point of view. And Delfim said in 72, how can I say this in English? Bendita, God's-bled pollution. Why? Because pollution means development. So that's what they did. Yes. Because pollution is development, because industry. So it's quite different.
Somebody Dave, did you have a question? Somebody had a question.
Yes. First off, on behalf of all of us, thank you for your time, Mr. President. In the U.S. and increasingly around the world, as our professor mentioned, businesses are increasingly focused on the triple bottom line. What role here in Brazil is the government currently taking, and can it take in the future to promote and ensure businesses have a positive impact, not just on the people they touch and the environment, while at the same time ensuring profitability and alignment with shareholder interests?
Well, the current government in Brazil, as you probably know, now is hesitating a little bit in terms of what to do with the Brazilian economy. And why? Because when I was in office, I introduced lots of reforms. And we decided to open up the economy. This has been done before, but I followed the same process to integrate Brazil more actively into the world market. And my decision was, let's open doors for the business sector to invest. Let's create regulatory agencies. Let's transform the role of the state, instead of being direct producer, to be regulator. Well, this has been highly criticized by those who are in government, mainly by the governing party, which is the working class party, whose leader is Mr. Lula. Then Lula became president. Lula is more pragmatic kind of people. He has no fixed principles. He changes following the winds, hopefully, because otherwise it will be a disaster, what he had in his mind before, And so he decided to follow, more or less, alongside the principle, the lines we were introducing. I must say that in Brazil, the state always has and will continue to have an important role to play. But anyhow, to at least to ask also the business to come together. So Lula took the same. Now the president Dilma Rousseff, she is more, how would say, cautious in that direction. But she's also more technocratic, comparing to Lula. I would say more competent. She knows about the situation. She is able to read, data. So she's hesitating because she's looking what's going on. She knows that's necessary to move, but because of her dogmatic approach, she always all time doubting what has to be done. So and now she's maybe intervening too much, and the result is not very positive. If you look what is occurring now with the oil program in Brazil, or the energy program in Brazil, or the infrastructure program in Brazil, in all areas, you see what is necessary is more audacy, more capacity to take risks, and the government is trying to control everything. So we are not clear yet what will be the role of the Brazilian government in the future. Said that, I would say the Brazilian society is strong. Brazilians, organizations are very solid. Not only business. The media is independent in Brazil. The unions are independent. We have freedom in Brazil. We don't have yet the sense of an egalitarian justice, but we have freedom to speech, to move, etc. And the Brazilian society has, consistency. So, in spite of the fact that the government tries to move in one direction, I would say the movement coming from the earth, from the grassroots, is more into the other direction. So that's why I think, in spite of hesitation in government, the situation will move ahead. But the result up to in the last 2 years was doubtful because the GDP was very low. This year is around 1%, which is insufficient for our necessities. What is more, worrying than that is the rate of saving is very low. We are Americans in that sense. And the government is motivating people to expend more, families, and open more credit. You know the consequence of that. If you open credit without any restriction, the result comes after, but we can. So that is the situation now.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this morning we had the very fortunate, through our friends from Santander, to visit Iliopolis. Did I say that right? Yes. And some of the entrepreneurs there. And one of the projects we're working on is about the informal economy and the formal economy. And I'd like to get your opinion about what government can do to help bring people out of an informal economy into the formal economy and make it easier for them to move in that direction.
I would say the Brazilian government is trying to do that. So it is a continuous effort, which has been relatively successful in the last years, because we are diminishing the requirements to formalize, and also there are some programs to reduce taxes, because this may be the key question, to reduce tax for small business. Otherwise, for them, it's impossible to formalize, and even for people. See. If you compare with what happened maybe every 10 years, you'll see that we are trying to make progress in the area. Still, it depends on in what regions are you referring to. One thing is São Paulo, another thing if you go to the Amazon or to the backward parts of the Northeast, or then you see that the levels of informality are very high. And now maybe because of more recent programs in terms of fellowship, I started this program to the cash transfer to give people, but Lula, expanded enormously the program. So this is also interfering in the formalization, because people would prefer to receive a small, pension from government than to work and to formalize the occupation. So there is a kind of still a moving situation. But I would say if you look across time, we are making progress in decreasing, the informal sector of the Brazilian economy.
You spoke about the rapid pace at which Brazil has been growing. What strategies do you see as being the most instrumental to employ to meet the growing demand?
I don't know if I kept your what.
With all the growth in Brazil, how do you think the demand can be met? Demand for food.
Yes,
demand
no.
for-
Yeah, well, you see, the domestic demand in Brazil is expanding continuously, very, very fastly. Because of political reasons, 20 years ago was, quite fashionable to speak about the lack of food, programs to finish with people without food, so on. But this was much more demagoguery than reality. The point is that still we have undernutrition in several areas, but not properly the lack of food. You see, there is no such a phenomenon as you can see, had in Africa or in Asia, or people starving people because of lack of food. In some specific situations, for instance, in areas of dried climate in the Northeast, when we have a dryness season, then we had problems with food. But in the last maybe 30 years, we have programs to take care of that, you see. So we have malnutrition, yes, still. Now on the opposite sense too, obesity. Obesity is more dramatic in Brazil than the opposite, you see, which means that there is no lack of food. On the other hand, if you look the price of food in Brazil, if you go to a restaurant in São Paulo, middle class or upper middle class, it's very expensive. But there are several levels of market. So you can eat very cheap too. But this variation can be from 1 to 10, more, 1 to 10. And 1 is not impossible to eat. I mean, myself or you, it's not impossible. You go there is the name is per kilo. You pay per kilo. I don't know in São Paulo 25 reais, which means $12 per kilo. And if you probably have, I don't know how your capacity. But anyhow, in my case, no more than 300, 1/3 of 1 kilo. So probably with $4 or less, I can. It depends, you see. So, of course, in some specific areas, some situations, you have the problem. But normally, that's not the case. And why? Because we have an old tradition in agriculture and food production. You see, still we have an enormous amount of products are wasted because we don't have good transportation, because we are losing maybe 20-25% of our production every year. You see? So that's not our main question. In some areas, urban areas, maybe in some situations, dramatic situations, or in the case of dryness or something like that, the government has to act. Otherwise, no, it's not dramatic, the situation.
Hello, Mr. President. I'm an international student from China.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just now you mentioned about globalization. I read news that Brazil is negotiation with the WTO. So WTO will require the Brazil to reduce the import tax on the consumer products. So what Brazil will do to help the internal industry, to help them to go for the future? Yeah.
If I understood, the point is that to reduce tax to ease the consumption. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
WTO required the government to reduce the import tax.
The import tax. Yeah.
Import tax.
Yeah. Well, import tax depends of the situation. In some cases, in some moments, we need to have import tax. For instance, to protect to some degrees to protect the domestic, production. But normally, I think the trend goes into the direction of the reduction of import taxes, you see, not of the increasing of import tax. But this implies that you have to increase your productivity to compete more. No? In some cases, you have to reduce taxes, or for instance, in the case of mass consumption. In Brazil now, there is a trend toward the reduction of tax for food, some kind of food, at least basic, food, to have to amplify the access and not to reduce tax in these areas. And simultaneously now in Brazil, the government is increasing tariffs for the import of other things, not food, other things. But why? Because they want to protect the Brazilian industry. Well, this is, I understand in some moments, but temporarily. Otherwise, we will distort the progress of our own industry. You see, but as you know, there is a permanent kind of conflict between needs for money, fiscal money, capacity for to people to pay, and also the limits of that, you see. In our case, the tax burden is of about, I don't know exact, 36% of GDP, which is very high. It's very high. I mean, we pay tax in Brazil, you see. I mean, not we pay. So some people pay tax in Brazil. There are those who don't prefer not to pay. But anyhow, the burden is very high in general terms. If you compare with other Latin American countries, for instance, in Mexico, it's 16%. Here it's more than double. I think it's important for mainly for developing countries to have the capacity to use fiscal money because of education, because of health, because of to fight poverty. That's simple. Without fiscal money, you cannot take care of these questions. But to have limits to that. Maybe in our case, we are reaching the limit of the possibility to increase the tax. We have to decrease taxes in the case of Brazil. Meanwhile, in Mexico, they have to increase. They have to increase. In Mexico, the decision was to tax oil and to use the oil income as if the oil income would be fiscal money. The result was a disaster for the oil company, because the oil company cannot afford the necessities of the country. See? So how to balance this? You know in America what's going on now in terms of taxes. This is a permanent struggle, what to do. And the rich people always are blaming that they are highly taxed. The French now are making enormous protests because in France they are taxing 75% for those who receive more than 1 million euros per year. Of course, it's almost an expropriation, you see. On the other hand, how to pay the debt? America will face a similar problem in the future because your debt is the American debt is so enormous. I don't know how they will face this. I read yesterday 2 articles by Jeffrey Sachs, very interesting about what's going on in America. It's very worrying. So it's an extremely complicated problem. In China, it's more simple.
So thank you again for being with us this afternoon. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the current inequalities with regard to both race and gender, what progress has been made, and also what can be done to improve these inequalities, specifically with regard to education.
Well, as you know, the Brazilian society has been always considered as very unequal society, and this is true. This is true. The base for inequality came from old times, came from slavery and the concentration of land. You in America, you had also slavery, but the land concentration was has no comparison with Brazil. Because since the American Union, the decision was to give access to land. This was very important to decrease some very important factor in terms of increasing inequality. In Brazil, land has been highly concentrated, and we had slavery up to the end of the 19th century. So after the abolition of slavery, the result was massive poverty and incapacity to integrate the blacks into the market. the blacks have been integrated relatively into the capitalist market through women has made. This was the way. That's why there is a kind of cult for the black mother, because she was the key of the family. She was really the pillar of the family, the reintegration of the family. So the situation of the inequality was very profound in Brazil. And then we had migration, as like in America. If you go from São Paulo to the south of Brazil, today probably majority is no more composed by Portuguese people or people from Portuguese descent. It's by Italians, Germans, Japanese, and blacks, and so on and so forth. So, and the migration also, at the beginning, added a problem to the blacks, because they replaced the blacks into the market. And some of them were also poor. Most of them were poor. So it was a long process to try to, through social mobility, to expansion of the economy, to be more integrated into Brazilian society. So the injustice was very profound in Brazil. And not just with respect to, at the beginning, blacks and migrating people, but also women, see? So there was the tradition, the Iberian tradition was much more a male tradition. Well, in our case, it's not that dramatic as in other Hispanic situations. Maybe because this is a kind of paradox because of slavery, because the women from the white families have been trained in giving order to the slaves. There is a foreign visitor to Brazil in the 19th century, a Frenchman named Saint-Hilaire, who wrote that the Brazilian women, they used to speak very loudly. And why? Because they ordered all time slaves. See? But the point is, in the traditional family, the role of the woman was ambiguous. Inside the walls of home, but they had enormous power inside it. And then when you look what happened with the work, the expansion of the market, or the working market, we will see that the proportion of women is very high, has been always high. Now it's, I don't know exactly, but it's around 45%, if not more, are composed by, as you know, in America, the big transformation with respect to the relationship between men and women was during the Second World War, because the men have been recruited and the women became workers. And this has been very important in transforming the culture in America. In our case, the labor market was very important for that. And we have been forced to recognize the role of women. When we decided, for instance, I decided to create this program of cash transfer, the decision was to give money for the lady, not the man, in the family. Because the women were much more stable and capable to take care of children than men. So, but then there are different aspects who are redefining the role of women. Still, of course, there is no equality, but there are forces moving in the sense of more equality. With respect to the blacks, the situation was very, very dramatic in Brazil. We had always the kind of mythology about racial democracy. My first works were in this field. When I was still very young, I wrote some books on the blacks in Brazil. To our surprise, the discrimination was very high. I'm referring to the 50s, during the 50s, was very high. In clubs, everywhere, you have discrimination between blacks and whites. Well, still we have, but this is moving more positively more recently. Now we have some programs of, affirmative policies. So we have, I know this is controversial, but we have quota for blacks in universities. There are also in public service, there are incentives to employ blacks. So this is moving. if you watch the TV in Brazil, you will see that always now blacks are appearing there. 20 years ago, it was not like that, or 50 years ago, zero, because the idea was, well, let's put blacks aside. Brazil, there was an ideology of whitenization, branquização, to import more white migrants from Europe to turn the Brazilians more, white. No more. Now there is a kind of pride of the mixed situation. You see, almost again a cult of the mulattoes, blacks, so on and so forth. But still, if you go down into the social scale, the discrimination is not very high. As far as you go up, well, still not simple. I don't give you the name of the person, but just recently in Rio, I was involved in a discussion about the acceptance of one of big Brazilian football players in an elite club in Rio. The resistance was enormous, and it was not yet solved. He's a worldwide famous man. No problem. He's not white. So I cannot disguise the situation. We still have, but we are moving. And if you look the educational situation or the poverty situation, income distribution, you'll see that always the blacks are in the worst position. If you want to promote blacks, maybe it will be enough to promote poors, because the majority of the poors are black. So still we have problems in that sense. Not legally. Our legislation is very open. It is a crime to discriminate. It's a crime, so on and so forth. There is a permanent struggle against that. But still, it will take some time to. I would say that on the other hand, even the fact that we proclaimed that we had a kind of racial democracy implies the desire of have a racial democracy. You see, it was not true, but even officially, we are insisting we are a racial democracy. It's positive, because we are motivating people in the sense that it's better to have a racial democracy than not to have a racial democracy. On the other hand, culturally, we don't have what in other parts of the world exists, a black culture and a white culture. There is no such a difference. The culture is the same one. One of the samba, for instance, is a national, music. It's not a black music. Some of the most famous, not samba, but anyhow, Brazilian composers are white, and they compose as if not. They don't have the notion that they are white or black. Culturally, we are much more integrated than other cultures, and we try to assimilate immediately. We don't have a white cuisine, like in America. You go to the Caju, I don't know how to say that, in the south of the United States. We don't have our cuisine is mixed. The food, is mixed. Maybe the success by football players has been important in disseminating the idea that the blacks are good, and also the music and so on, and the carnival. So this is contradictory. What I said before, that you have the prejudice, and what I'm saying now. But life is contradictory.
We have
Yeah.
time for only a couple more questions.
Yeah, because I have. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question is, what do you see as the greatest hopes and the greatest fears for Brazil in the future?
Well, I think what I just said to you about our flexibility in cultural terms, I think this is a positive, is an asset for Brazil. Because supposing we are marching toward a more integrated global order and a more democratic global order, we have to accept the others, the differences. And in some sense, we have differences in Brazil, we had, and we still have prejudice, but we accept more easily the existence of the opposite, of others. We are more prone to admit differences. I think this is a cultural advantage. On the other hand, I would say, in spite of enormous difficulties we faced in the past, if you look in 20th century, up to 1980, only Japan had a rate of growth per capita higher than Brazil. Now we have in agriculture, if you list the 10 top export products, Brazil is among maybe 7 or 8 in every. The first or second in 7 or 8 items. You see? So we have good agriculture. Brazil is maybe the only really more industrialized country in the Americas, apart from the United States and Canada. We have industry, real industry, not just assembly of different parts. We have in Brazil. If you have this, you look services, you look internet or the banking system. The banking system, because of inflation, was forced to move very quickly, using the internet and this kind of instruments to be very quick in reconsidering the assets and so forth. So the services are making progress. So we have if you look the list of these 10 biggest GDP economies, Brazil is there. What is still lacking? More justice, more equality in terms of human relationships, more education. You see, this is what we are. We are now in a point in which what is important is no more the quantity but the quality. And how to give this, to go ahead transforming quantity into quality is not simple. You see, Brazilians love to compare ourselves with because of our GDP. Wow! But if you go to Denmark, very small GDP, but what kind of life? Of quality of life. So what we don't have yet is this kind of intangible values which still have to develop.
Hi.
Last question.
One of the questions our group is focusing on is, what are some of the most promising tools that you see in Brazil for increasing social mobility?
Well, Brazilian social mobility process is a long process. I received recently from an old student of mine, who is now 70 years old, and he gave me 2 or 3 weeks ago a book he wrote, and I made the preface. I did no idea anymore about social mobility. And this book has been published at the beginning of the 90s and was referring to the second half of the 20th century, and the rates of social mobility were very high. Now this is still more like that. There is a kind of exaggeration even in nowadays by saying, well, now we are adding to this middle class, I don't know how many millions of people. Well, it's not exactly that. We are expanding the strata in terms of income, which is not necessarily implies in transforming people into middle class. Class sociologically is more complex than that. It's not just income. It's a similar education, a network of relationship, similar values. That's not yet the true, but anyhow, social mobility, yes, is based on the expansion of this of income, and you are expanding the income of several strata. So there are lots of data to show you that this is a process, not just old one in continuity, but is now dramatically increasing in the last 20 years, and it's increasing more and more and more. So this is the dynamic, the social dynamic is very, very high. I repeat, comparing with what is middle class consumption in America or in Europe, it's still always very modest, very modest. The patterns of consumption are still very modest. But anyhow, and this is what assures us in terms of future. We have hope, and the hope is not just a sentiment. It depends also on experiences, you see. And this, I remember when I was making research a long time ago, the first research on employment, I participated in this research some years ago, some decades ago. And it was very impressive because the sense of the father in their family was, well, my situation is not that good, but my son will be better than myself, my daughter too. So this is feel good. They are feeling good. If you look at surveys about the situation in Brazil, and if you compare with reality, will be surprised. Really, it's not that good, but the sense that you are making progress, because we are making progress. It's a personal experience of being more included, of having more access. So that's why, this is the American have this experience 50 years ago. Now you are maybe in a ceiling. You are trying to see, to avoid disaster.
Mr. President, not a last question, but I would willing to ask you not an advice, because you have a phrase in Brazil: if your advice is good, we don't give, you sell it. But if you can give us, let's say, a kind of a tip. I'm struggling with what we say just in the beginning, that we, in 50s or during the World War, we have only 3 giants.
Yeah.
Right? Churchill, Roosevelt, and Hitler. So maybe we can prepare a giant for the future from this class, from this room.
I hope.
I hope too. If you can give us, let's say, one last tip to really help these guys and these kids to think about differently in the future, or to build, let's say, make a difference and can keep a different legacy for us all around.
I'll say be flexible in your behavior and be very consistent with respect to your principles. You have to be convicted that you are right. And if you are, you have to follow what you think is right. And you have to preach in the sense that you are convinced that you are, is a good cause to fight for. You see? And be flexible in the way you try to lead with others. You cannot just impose, you have to convince. I think the modern leadership, the democratic leadership requires this. Well, thank you very much.